in pursuit of health and wisdom. Sapio with Buck Joffrey.
Welcome back to Sapio with Buck Joffrey. I'm Buck Joffrey. Today we are going to do a Q&A show. We have some trickling in questions from the audience out there in the Sapio ecosystem. Some of these things are interesting as they relate to current events, and some of them are of the mundane. But either way, they are important to try to take some of this information in. To do that, I have Ben Hyatt, one of our producers here, going to read the questions and then, do any sort of follow-up that he thinks is necessary. So, Ben, are you locked and loaded here or what?
I'm locked and loaded. I've got some good questions and
okay,
good variety. We'll see. We'll put you on the spot here.
Okay, well, I'll do my best.
Okay, so the first question, this is obviously really big news. Matthew Perry, kind of beloved actor, died in his hot tub. And just this past week, they've, I guess the coroner put out a report saying that it was a ketamine, if I'm saying it right, overdose. So the question is, did Matthew Perry die of ketamine overdose?
Yeah. Well, obviously, so, I haven't seen like a coroner's report on this, but I think the big question is, from this is like, ketamine overdose. Usually, okay, like people usually don't die from ketamine overdoses, right? And the reason is that ketamine actually is known to be what I think they used to call it the buddy drug or something like that in Vietnam, where it's an anesthetic, but it's an anesthetic that does not suppress breathing. So the problem with other anesthetics that can be deadly when they're at higher doses, like for example propofol, which Michael Jackson used to use for going to bed, or some of the opioids, is they suppress the respiratory system. So basically, they just people just stop breathing. Ketamine does not do that. Ketamine's real effect at sort of these levels that are used in anesthesia are really related to being completely dissociated from your body, and that's obviously quite a bit different from stopping breathing. So the question is, could he have died from ketamine overdose? And my guess is that that the ketamine would have a role in there. My understanding is that the levels that he had were sort of in that level that you would put somebody at for surgery. But again, people don't die just because of that. But if you put them at that high level, they're completely dissociated from reality. And so presumably, if you are going to get into a tub and you fall asleep, and you may not notice that you're falling asleep in a tub. And so indirectly, it absolutely can play a role. So I think this is an important thing, though, because I think ketamine is actually showing a significant value in terms of treatment of depression. And certainly at lower doses, we're seeing a lot of benefit to people. So I want to make sure that this doesn't become like, oh, ketamine's a bad thing. In fact, I think it's one of the more promising things as it comes to depression and the kind of thing. And that's what he was taking it for. Now, why his levels were as high as they were, that's pretty concerning, because usually if you're going to have levels that high, you're going to want to do that like in a doctor's office or in a psychiatrist's office. You're not going to just, write somebody a whole bunch of ketamine and send them home so they can be dissociated and have no idea what they're doing. So I guess that's what I would say about that, is that it probably contributed, but it's hard for me to see it as actually being something that in and of itself would kill him.
One of the follow-up articles that I did read said that most likely, had he not been in the tub, he wouldn't have died. He would have just fallen asleep on his bed. Okay, so I have another question. This is a viewer question. So the question is it true that brushing or not brushing your teeth well can cause you to get dementia?
It's actually a good question. This is you would think, well, not brushing, it sounds like you're trying to scare your kids into brushing your teeth, right? But they'll be like, yeah, I'm really scared of dementia, Dad. But there is a bacteria that is called Porphyromonas gingivalis, okay? And this is a bacteria that's associated with gum disease in particular. And in fact, it has been associated with Alzheimer's disease. And as it turns out, what happens is that this bacteria releases an enzyme. What that enzyme seems to do is interact with brain cells in a way that could ultimately contribute to the development or aggregation of what we know as tau proteins and also beta amyloid plaques. Those things obviously are key features in Alzheimer's disease. So I'd have to go in and dive really deep in this, but there's no doubt there's literature suggesting there's this link. So I would suggest to brush your teeth and listen to what your dentist tells you to do. I will tell you that I've been going to the dentist now quarterly for cleanings. Don't let them x-ray you every time. I know that's like a revenue source sometimes that a lot of offices try to do. But I think an x-ray over, once a year is more than enough. I actually don't want an x-ray more than every couple of years. Personally, I know I have some dentist friends who are going to probably write me and tell me I'm wrong about that. But I also used to be a head and neck surgeon, so I'm a little conscientious about the need for radiation in that case. But bottom line is, yeah, gum disease is associated with Alzheimer's, development of Alzheimer's disease, probably through this mechanism. So in addition to, keeping your teeth a long time, because you're going to live into your hundreds now, you have the additional benefit of not getting dementia.
Another question, this might be a couple questions, but there has been a rise in colorectal, if I'm saying it correct, cancers, especially among young people. Mm-hmm. What are some of the key symptoms people should be looking for? And then I guess, what do you think some of the causes? I don't think they have anything identified. They have some guesses, but what do you think?
Yeah, good question. One of the problems with colorectal cancers is the symptoms themselves are sometimes not completely clear, right? I mean, certainly pain. Probably the big ones are bleeding in the stool, weight loss, fatigue, right? So some of those things outside of the blood they're pretty ambiguous, right? And so if somebody somebody who's 35 years old comes into an office and complains of those symptoms, it's probably not very high up on any particular physician's differential diagnosis on what that is. But as it turns out, the numbers on colorectal cancer in younger people have gone way up, right? I mean, they went from, if you look at numbers from 1995, I believe, the number of people in the under 55 category, I think they only made up about 11% or 10 or 11% of those colorectal cancers. And now, in 2023, 2022, whenever the most recent data that I was looking at here, it's double that. And it's 20%, right? So 1 in 5 colorectal cancers is coming up in people who are under 55. So the question is why, right? Why would that be? And I think, certainly we're detecting some of them earlier, but that's not enough. I mean, because these people are obviously dying of this stuff earlier too. Part of this goes back to things that we've talked about on this show before. Some of the things that we know are increasing risks of cancers in general, like, childhood obesity. When it comes to colorectal cancers, for example, specifically, we've talked about some of the different categories of foods that might be contributing to that. Ultra-processed foods, for example, meats, are known carcinogens. And we've also talked about the rise in high meat, high protein carnivore diets, right? Now, there wasn't much of that 30 years ago, right? I mean, there was people doing a lot of protein, but the idea of a diet that was largely meat and because of that, ultimately not a whole lot of fiber. That's a relatively new phenomena, and I've talked about this before. I do think that, people feel great on these diets while they're on them. The high red meat, the carnivore type diets. But I do think there already is very clear data suggesting increases risk in colorectal cancer in particular. And so I would imagine that some of this is coming from that switch to higher red meat diets. I mean, obviously it's a speculation, but I mean, if just anecdotally think about it, I mean, Ben, you and I are about the same age. Yep. 30 years ago, people were not talking about that. I mean, it was people who were, taking protein powders, and bodybuilders were doing a lot of, heavy protein and stuff like that. But you didn't just have a bunch of people who decided that, all they really need to do is eat, red meat all the time. And I think that we're going to see epidemiological repercussions of that. And that's what my thought is. On the bright side, I mean, obviously we've talked a little bit about, screening. The screening for colorectal cancer, I think the recommendations are now 45 for colonoscopies and earlier if there's a family history. But we've also talked about, other ways to play offense on this show. We've talked about the Grail, the Gallery test from Grail, and then obviously the full body MRIs that can help with that as well. So there's ways to catch it early too, but there's no doubt there is an increase in rise in colorectal cancers, and I think it's probably it's environmental, but I think there probably is some behavioral stuff related to diet. That's my opinion.
Okay. And one of the things that I read is you talked screening is that one of the big issues with it is it's lots of times it's not caught until it's stage 4, right? So
yeah, I mean, that was the whole idea behind the Prenuvo full body MRI thing, right? I mean, just like most solid cancers, most of these cancers are extremely treatable if they're caught early. But if you've got a big tumor and it's, you've got stage 3, stage 4 cancer, it's probably already spread. And when things kind of start spreading, then it becomes very, very challenging. And so, again, I'm a big advocate for full body MRI and also for, I actually haven't had Gallery, but I want to. And I think those are very useful things to have and to get in front of. So,
I've got another question. You've talked a lot about hyperglycemia or high blood sugar. Is it bad to have low blood sugar, which is hypoglycemia?
Yeah. So, I've had this question before. Understanding that hypoglycemia is a little bit different. So hypoglycemia is used to describe low blood sugar, but typically when you talk about hypoglycemia, you're not talking about a chronic condition. In other words, these people are not walking around with low blood sugar all of the time, right? In fact, diabetics are often the ones who end up with these episodes of hypoglycemia, of low blood sugar. So what happens when you get low blood sugar? Basically, it's like you're going to pass out. Right, I mean, because your brain isn't getting your brain isn't getting fed, and your body is all of a sudden run out of energy, and you pass out. I mean, that's kind of what hypoglycemia is if you've ever experienced it, right? But it's really not like diabetes, where diabetes is really like this chronic condition where you have an average level of blood glucose that's running at a higher level than it should, and over time, that blood glucose gets all sticky and, ruins these proteins in your body. Hypoglycemia is usually episodic, and it has to do with the rhythms of the blood sugar going up and down. So like I said, in diabetes, it's actually pretty common because those people have, pretty volatile blood sugars, especially if, your insulin, if you're taking insulin and things like that. There's also syndromes. I mean, some people have hypoglycemia more often than others, and that's why, they're told they're hypoglycemic. They experience these frequent episodes of low blood sugar, maybe, a few hours after eating, because what happens in those situations is that insulin, when you have blood sugar in your system from absorbing it from food, insulin gets released from the pancreas, and the insulin is actually what brings that blood sugar into the blood cells and out of the bloodstream itself, lowering blood sugar. But if it lowers it too much, then you get hypoglycemic. So you can see there's sort of this pendulum, and sometimes, even people don't have a problem with this. You eat a meal, and then like an hour or two later, you feel like you need a nap or something like that. It's because you're getting hypoglycemic. So some people experience that a lot more. They may have this syndrome of reactive hypoglycemia. There's rare stuff too. I mean, you can have insulin tumors that release things. You can have liver diseases that can do things like that as well. And obviously, another consideration if you have this is that there are certain medications, again, certainly those that are used to treat diabetes, that can cause frequent episodes of hypoglycemia. In and of itself, though, usually this is not a condition that, certainly is a long-term health concern for most people. I think the issue becomes more like, if you get hypoglycemic often, you just make sure you walk around with a little bit of, maybe like with a little bit of candy or something like that. So, if you feel like you're going to pass out, you can quickly get some sugar in your bloodstream.
Is it a symbol of some other potential diseases too, though? Like, can it be other things?
It could be. As you mentioned, severe liver disease, because the liver has a big role in regulating blood sugar. So, the liver's capacity to release glucose in the bloodstream can be impaired. And so that certainly could be one of the things. There could be hormonal deficiencies as well. There's adrenal insufficiency, which the adrenal glands can be underactive. Addison's disease, JFK had that. You can have growth hormone deficiency. We talked about growth hormone in another podcast. That can lead to chronic low blood sugar levels as well. And again, various insulin type tumors. But again, those things are pretty rare. Certainly liver cancers, and so people get liver disease from, a lot of alcoholism and stuff like that. But the rest of them are relatively rare. Okay, so there's a lot of stuff going around right now. Traveling. You're going to be traveling, right? Mm-hmm. I'm going to be traveling. A lot of friends. Is there anything that you can take or that you would recommend as far as like boosting the immune system before travel, or is it all kind of nonsense? I don't think it's nonsense. I think the thing with, like, honestly, if you're traveling, if you're if you're in large groups, it's probably not. I mean, I don't know if I'll do this or not, but I wouldn't fault anybody for wearing a mask right now, and not because of COVID. It's just actually influenza season, and it's a really bad one. A lot of people have gotten the flu, and they've been getting sick, so wearing a mask. But I do think that, listen, the immune system ultimately is there's not one magic bullet. I mean, people sometimes swear by zincs and vitamin C's and things like that, and there's certainly no harm in that. But I think just trying to maintain, good nutrition, make sure that you're not just eating junk, and making sure you get enough sleep. Those are probably the biggest things you can do in order to try to stay healthy during the traveling. But I don't see. I've never seen anything that that specifically seems to ward off the spirits, so to speak. I mean, I'd love to see some data on something that actually does. But I mean, outside of, I think there's some studies on in terms of like vitamin C and zinc that if somebody's getting a cold, that they can ward it off much quicker, and they might be able to dodge it. But other than that, I think it's just a matter of like staying hydrated, eating well, getting enough sleep. Sounds boring, but sometimes, life is boring.
Do you recommend, like, I know vaccines are controversial for a certain segment of our society, so we don't want to get too heavy into it, but should I have gotten a flu shot? Like, would you recommend me getting a flu shot this year? I have not this year. I did last year.
Okay, so, again, this ends up being a personal thing for sure, and some people, for some reason, are just anti-everything at this point, but the thing with the flu vaccination is that it's been around for so long. I mean, it's been around for what? Oh, gosh. I don't even want to say, but it's been around since I was a little kid. It's a old-fashioned kind of vaccine where, you just, it's not an mRNA vaccine if you're afraid of those or whatever. I think that especially the elderly, I think it's really important because the flu kills a lot of people. It has every year. It does. And this year, my buddy Alan, Alan Viglione, has been talking about how it's been kind of a vicious flu. And so it's funny you asked because, I was intending to get a flu vaccine this year, in part because I'm going to be traveling a little bit, and I don't want the flu, especially like if I'm in Europe or something like that. So do I recommend it? Yeah, I mean, listen, man, you're 50 plus and you if you don't want to get the flu, it'll reduce the risk of you getting the flu. If you do get the flu, it'll make it less intense, probably. And the safety profile on that vaccination, it's been around for an awful long time. And I don't see a whole lot of risk in doing it. So maybe we should go do it together. Go over to CVS and have them jab us.
That's all I have.
Sounds good.
More questions. So they just important to know that people can submit questions right on the website. So it's the sapiopodcast.com website. If you ever have questions, just enter them there, and we will get them on a show.
Okay, well, that's it for this episode of Sapio, and we'll catch you next time.
Thanks for listening to Sapio with Buck Joffrey. A quick reminder that while I am, in fact, a surgeon, nothing I say should be construed as medical advice. Now, make sure to include your physician in any medical decisions you make. And also, if you're enjoying the show, please make sure to show your support with a like, share, or subscribe. Until next time, this is Buck Joffrey for Sapio with Buck Joffrey.